Hi, this is Mr. Sato. I'm going to explain counterarguments. When you're trying to persuade someone of something in a persuasive essay or debate, you generally want to give facts and arguments that agree with your position, of course. But to be really effective, you need to give some of the opposing side's arguments too. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but let me give you an example. In his well-known letter from Birmingham Jail, this guy, you may have heard of him, responds to these 8 Alabama religious leaders who published a letter saying his actions protesting segregation were, quote, extreme, unquote. First, he argues that his protests are not extreme, but then he changes to a different tactic. He says, yes, maybe in a way, you're right, I am an extremist. At that point, you might imagine his reader thinking, wait, what? You think I'm right? But Dr. King goes on to compare himself to other extremists they will have heard of: Jesus, Amos, Paul, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, great reformers from the Bible and American history. Remember, Dr. King is a Baptist minister writing to other Judeo-Christian religious leaders, so these religious references are part of a domain that they share. He reminds these clergymen that Jesus was an extremist for love, truth, and goodness. What he did there was respond to an attack by agreeing briefly with the opponent. It makes the attacker relax his oppositional stance for a moment. And then Dr. King comes back with a devastating rebuttal that his reader couldn't possibly disagree with. It was brilliant. You may have heard of the 3 ways the ancient Greeks said you can try to persuade someone: ethos, logos, and pathos. That's a whole other topic. But briefly, logos is logical reasoning, showing cause and effect. And pathos is an appeal to emotions like pity, patriotism, or indignation. Ethos is a little harder to get a handle on, but it can be understood as credibility. Why should your reader trust you? You need to come across as a knowledgeable, reasonable, and fair-minded person, not a fanatic who only sees things in black and white terms, good and evil. That's where the counterargument or counterclaim comes in. By showing that you understand what this issue looks like from where your opponents are standing, you disarm them. You come over to your opponent's side for a moment and show yourself to be open-minded and fair. You admit that your opponents have a reasonable position and you can understand why they think what they do. But your argument is just more right than theirs, and you forcefully explain why. That's a rebuttal. Look at this question. So let's say your position is that violent video games do not cause young people to be more violent. Your reader or opponent is going to say that they do, and your job is to convince that person to agree with you. First, you're going to thoroughly research the issue and line up your most persuasive arguments. You're going to point out that sales of violent video games are up, but that violent crime by young people is actually down 37%. And if the games were causing violence, then wouldn't the violent crimes go up when the sales of the violent games went up? You're also going to cite the 2011 U.S. Supreme Court decision in which the court rejected arguments that the games caused minors to act violently. And you'll continue with more evidence and arguments that support your position. But at some point in your arguments, not in the first paragraph or the conclusion, I think, you should talk about your opponent's most persuasive argument. You're anticipating your reader's objections and addressing them. That's the counterargument. Do your research. What is the opposition's most persuasive argument? Where are you vulnerable? Don't choose an easy one because it's easy to knock down. That's called a straw man. See, it'd be easy to knock this right over. Choose one that could actually hurt your position. Let's say that you think the most damaging argument the opposition has is that a lot of qualified people think that violent video games cause aggression in children. 90% of pediatricians believe that. 67% of parents think so too. And maybe most persuasively, and I got this from procon.org, a joint statement was put out by 6 national medical associations, including the American Medical Association and the American Psychological Association. And it said, quote, well over 1,000 studies, including reports from the Surgeon General's Office, the National Institute of Mental Health, and numerous studies conducted by leading figures within our medical and public health organizations point overwhelmingly to a causal connection between media violence and aggressive behavior in some children. That one could hurt you, right? If you were arguing the other side, you'd use that, wouldn't you? I would. Don't avoid that argument. Doing so leaves you defenseless to it. Cite that argument yourself. Put it out there. And I'm not talking about a single sentence either. Explain it fully and fairly. But then, respond to it in a way that is favorable to your argument. If you can contradict that or show a flaw in it, then do so. That's your rebuttal. You might say that there are equally valid reports showing the opposite, and then cite those studies. Not only that, a report by a Dr. Ferguson of Stetson University showed that many of those studies don't really reflect the way the games are played in real life. And the ways that test subjects showed aggression are artificial measures that, again, are not a reflection of real-life behavior. And then you go into great and persuasive detail to show that those flawed studies aren't worth the paper they're printed on. A rebuttal takes your opponent's best argument away from them, and it invites them to come on over to your side to consider your position as well. If you can't contradict it, though, just give them that point. That's called a concession. It's like saying, okay, I'll give you that one. And then you undermine it as best you can. You try to weaken it. You might say, yes, there may be some causal connection with some children between the games and violence, but there are other kinds of things that can cause aggressive behavior, so maybe we should look at this in that larger context. Then give a long list of other things that are cited as possible causes of violent behavior. People used to say that heavy metal and rap music incited violence. Maybe you can find an article saying that watching contact sports on TV is connected to aggression too, or an article saying that caffeine is linked to aggression. You could point out that people are using your opponent's arguments to ban violent video games, and should we next try to ban rap music, football, and coffee? Okay, notice how I changed the subject there. When you concede a point, you could try this. You could try redirecting the discussion to an area where you have an advantage of some kind. Last, let's talk about transitions. You probably already know a thing or two about paragraph transitions. If not, check out my other video on that topic. But before giving your reader your counterargument, you have to indicate that you're about to do that, so that your reader is following your reasoning without getting confused. So you can use a transition like one of these. For example, you could say, people who say violent video games cause violence in real life might point out that, or while it's true that a joint statement by 6 leading medical associations said, or granted, there is some evidence suggesting a connection between violent video games and violent behavior. And then you give your counterargument. And then after that, your rebuttal could be preceded with another transition, like, so while it's true that some children are affected by some video games, it's equally true that, or nevertheless, or nobody denies that some kids might behave violently after 8 hours of Mortal Kombat, but, and then you give your rebuttal. Using a counterargument and rebuttal is a way of showing that you have come to your position after giving a balanced analysis of both sides, and that's more persuasive than just ranting from a single perspective. There's already too much of that in the world. Just look at the comment sections to videos and articles on the internet and you'll see what one-sided argumentation looks like. And those arguments are easily dismissed, right? So don't be like them. If you want to be persuasive, come across as fair and reasonable. And the best way to do this is by using counter arguments. Okay, now go get them.